Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest podcast YouTube video. I'm Simon, and I'm with my colleague Sam and our very good friend and colleague JC, who's over in Virginia in the US. We're based in the UK, and we are talking about AI and making analogies to how it's shaping the world and how it's shaping ourselves as people. And through previous conversations, JC has this brilliant analogy about AI safety and roads and fences. And I'm just going to pass you over to JC and he can start. And Samantha's not heard this bit yet, so it's new to her. So I'm interested to see her reaction as well as your reaction if you're listening in. So, JC, take it away.
So, in our previous conversation, we were talking about AI and the advent of AI and the eventualities that people are either excited about or that they're trepidatious or even fear with AI, and you can dive into all kinds of Hollywood concepts of things like Skynet, with the Terminator. You can dive into Tron if you want and think about the digital world that exists down there with these little personalities, or all these other things that we have, like the Matrix and stuff. We've discussed this a little bit, but ultimately, the fear that people have about artificial intelligence
Mm.
is that it might harm other people, right? It's the concern that we have for human beings. And then, of course, now comes the trepidation of what is it that we're really worried about, and what's the right answer to protecting the people that we care about? Because as human beings, no matter what side of any argument you're on, the extreme of every argument that ever goes anywhere has to do with the harm of people. Either people are being harmed this way or being harmed that way. Any argument you ever go to that goes to the emotional extremes of our human conscientiousness, it always goes to the idea of how do we protect ourselves and those that we care about the most, because we care about human beings. That's even and it's the biggest counter argument that we make to people, is we saying you don't really care about other people, because if you think this way, then you don't care about human beings, right? And you can hear that argument on both sides of just about anything that has a deeply emotional context to it. I don't care if it's political, academic, or religious. Just the bottom line is, do you care about people or not? And if you do, well, then you should think this way or this way, but everybody's making the same argument. How much do you care about people? So the analogy that kind of came up in our conversation before, I was pondering on the people. I'm a father. I have three children, and so protecting my children is foremost in my mind. And when I think of those that I love and those that I protect, my wife and my children are top of the line. That's the premier concept in my mind of how to protect others. And of course, when I think of protecting my children, even though they're all teenagers now, I often go back to thinking about when they were little toddlers, bouncing around, running around, cute as everything, exhausting and as all get out. But that's how I kind of envision them, and that's where the strongest emotional sense of protection comes from, is protecting my little ones, right? And so you think about, well, how do you protect your little ones? Well, if you want them to go outside and experience the world, sure, you take them outside, you hold their hand and whatnot. But often what we do is we just put a fence up. We have fences around our yards that keep the kids in and, kind of keep other people out a little bit. But generally it's to keep them in, right? Especially for like the little ones. You maybe you put them in a little uh, 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 it's been long enough. I've forgotten what you call it. The little cage that you put them in the house.
Yeah, they're pens, aren't they?
Oh,
Little
the
pen. Yeah, there's.
playpen.
It's not a cage, but it feels like a cage to them maybe sometimes. But or you put up little barriers on your stairs or something to keep
Yeah,
them from
yeah.
going up the stairs, things like that, right? And so
Mm.
that's what you do. You put up fences to stop them from going where you don't want them to go. And maybe you teach them a little bit about sidewalks and things like that. And of course, you can automatically think about crossing the road and being safe and learning to look both ways and all this kind of stuff. So there's that aspect. Okay, we want to protect our children. We put fences up. But then we're talking about AI. What is AI? What's the future of AI? Where is AI? What does AI do? AI is essentially a road. It is a pathway. It's taking us somewhere into the future, maybe into the past, but it's a AI is a roadway that you can navigate all over the place. You can go anywhere you want. And there's different kinds of roads and there's different kinds of AI. You have urban, environments with roads, and you have backcountry dirt and gravel roads, and AI is just the same thing. You have different places you can go with different types of roads, but it's this vast network of travelable things, and the internet is a road itself as well, but now AI has full access to the internet, and so it's going faster than the internet went, right? We most of us in this
Can I
conversation.
jump in there, JC? Because
Yeah, go
it
for it,
just made
please
me
do.
realise that the internet is, and usually when we search for something, it will just give you a whole kind of plethora of different options because it's scraped it from loads of different marketplaces or websites or whatever. But I suppose the analogy, like with the road, and if you're thinking about how Google, for example, now works, or any of those search tools,
Hmm.
but they're so much more personalized, aren't they? So actually, the first thing you will tend to see is a very targeted piece of information, and that channels you down a single road,
Hmm. Well, and
similar to
yeah,
the AI
precisely. So
does.
even though there's a broad network that you could go anywhere,
Yeah,
it's the algorithms, in Google, people do things on purpose to make their stuff show up in a search. Like they have your hashtags, you have whatever you do to make your stuff show up before everybody else's stuff. And if it's successful and it percolates to the top when you do a search related to something, your thing becomes the thing that becomes searchable first, and now that road is the one that becomes available. Now, there are ways to go to other places and to find other paths and other roads if somebody is so adventurous as to go looking for them. But the average person is just going to go where they're led. This
exactly.
is the pathway that's open. I'm going that way.
Yeah,
Like it's they don't even think about it. They're just like, oh, okay, this must be the pathway I must follow. And that's where we start to bleed into the concerns that human beings have about artificial intelligence. Like, what about the roads that open up for them that they can be led down? Like, they're going to be led down this pathway that's going to show them information that's going to give them a perception that might end up being dangerous, dangerous to them, or if taking on that perception makes them more dangerous, that's a concept they worry about. So now we start getting into the idea of, okay, so how do we protect ourselves and how do we protect those that we love? So we're going back to the toddler and we're going back to the fenced in yard. And, depending on where you live, you may or may not let your child play in the street, right? Like, there's all kinds of places where people play stickball in the street, from way back in the day, and those are in urban environments. And then, I grew up in suburbia, sort of, in where we have cul-de-sacs, and where
mm,
we have, sprawling neighborhoods with, quarter-acre yards everywhere. And so you could go out in the road on your bicycle or do whatever you wanted to. And cars wouldn't come along because you had this kind of like the only cars that would come would be neighbors who knew to look out for you essentially. And so you didn't have to worry about traffic blasting by you. And then you've got, I've been down on backcountry roads, like gravel and stuff. You can see for 3 miles either direction. So, like a child wandering out onto one of those roads is not really a major issue. They can play with the frogs and crickets and any kind of puddles and stuff and not worry about traffic, from one direction or another. So some roads maybe are a little bit safer to play on because of the cultural nuance that everybody understands in that location where you are, or just because there's not much traffic, so to speak, on that road to really be concerned about. But there are roads that are dangerous, roads that a toddler should not be wandering by themselves. Someone who does not have the wherewithal to make really good decisions for themselves. You don't want them going down those pathways, right? And we're talking metaphorically as well as literally. It doesn't matter how you want to speak of it. So back to the idea of fences. Well, if we use a fence to protect our little ones, the ones we care about the most in this analogy, well, we could absolutely put up a fence around every road to make sure that every road is only accessible in the way that we want it to be accessible when we think it's allowed to be accessible. We can completely block it off with a steel gate that has no entry whatsoever, or we can put up with a nice little white picket fence that's inviting and it's just a quick little slide it open and move through however we want. With all the different kinds of safety protections and things that are available out there, and the conversations people are having around AI is how much should we restrict it? And so now they're getting into this concept of, well, where should we put our fences on these roadways? And if you think about it in reality, in terms of an actual road in real life, like that becomes an impossible task. You cannot put a fence around every road to protect every single potential individual who might get in danger by traveling that road,
Mm,
and so
agreed.
now you have to, like, well, so what are we supposed to do? We allow these dangerous roads in reality to exist with no fences whatsoever. Anybody can go down those roads anytime they want. They might be closed. There might be a sinkhole somewhere. There might be some bridge being built on the other end of it that you could fall off of. All kinds of dangerous stuff. Now you think about that in terms of the internet slash the AI capacity to travel the digital landscape that's available to us, and people want to put restrictions on it. And now the conversation becomes, okay, well, we can put restrictions on things, but how much of that can you do before the autonomy of an individual gets diminished? Like, because, like, I think about myself, I don't need a fence, right? I'm a licensed driver that I can get on a road. I know all the rules. I can go to any road. I've been in foreign countries on roads. I've been in all over the US on different roads. I know how to travel on a road pretty safely for myself. Sometimes I take a few risks. I go a little fast, I slide through the stoplights or something a little bit, uncautiously. Oh, by the way, uh, in the United States, if you roll through a stop sign, a common phrase, at least from the past, we used to call it as a California stop, where, like, you don't really hit the brakes and completely stop your vehicle. You just sort of, your brakes are on, but you're still kind of slightly rolling through. You can get pulled over and ticketed for a California stop in California. I have proven that in my past. So,
But I was just thinking what you were saying there, and it works both ways, I think, in that if you have all these fences up and somebody crosses the fence onto the road, then the fences stop them getting off
yeah,
as well. So once
sometimes your
you're on the road,
protection.
stuck on it, yeah, you're stuck then on the road because you can't find a way out of it. So protections, once you get over the protection, it's not a protection. In fact, it could even be worse than protection because you're now stuck on this course because you have no escape from it because all these fences are up.
Yeah,